Some lights are just for seeing. Others are for hoping. The lantern in Miriam Hayes's window was the second kind. It was a small, golden eye against the endless black of the winter night, a tiny shout into the roaring silence of the storm. It did not light the path for anyone who knew the way. It was a beacon for the lost. The wind howled around the little log cabin, a sound so loud and lonely it felt like a living thing. It whipped the snow into dizzying spirals and piled it into deep drifts against the door. Inside, Miriam Hayes placed another log into the stone fireplace. A shower of sparks danced up the chimney as the flames eagerly licked at the new wood. The warmth of the cabin was a small, brave circle in the middle of a vast, frozen world. The room was neat and clean, with a woven rug on the floor and a sturdy table under the window. But it was also too quiet. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the constant moan of the wind. Miriam's eyes, quiet shade of gray, moved to the window. Night had fallen hours ago, but she could not pull the curtains closed. Not yet. She walked to the table, her hand touching the cold glass of the lantern that sat there, waiting. With a match that flared and then steadied, she lit the wick. A soft, warm glow pushed back against the darkness outside. She lifted the lantern carefully, its metal handle cool under her fingers. She opened the window just a crack, and a blast of icy air rushed in, making the fire sputter. She placed the lantern on the sill and closed the window, sealing the cold out again. Now the light shone clearly, a steady and brave little star in the storm. She did this every single night. She had done it for a whole year. A year ago, her brother Thomas had gone out to check the trapline. A storm, just like this one, had blown in suddenly from the mountains. He never came home. The men from the nearby settlement had searched for days. When the weather cleared, they found one of his mittens frozen stiff. Nothing else. Everyone else believed Thomas was gone forever. They said the wilderness did not give back what it took. They were kind in their way. They would invite her for supper and ask her to come live with one of their families in the small town. They told her she should not be alone. But their words always had the same meaning underneath: move on. Stop waiting. He is not coming back. Miriam could not. To blow out the lantern felt like saying he was never coming back. It felt like giving up on him. And so she kept her vigil. She kept the faith. She turned from the window and picked up her mending, a wool sock with a hole in the heel. She tried to focus on the push and pull of the needle, but her mind was out in the storm with Thomas. Was he warm? Was he safe? Was he, somewhere, seeing a light and heading towards it? A sudden, fierce gust of wind shook the cabin, and the lantern flame flickered wildly. Miriam's head snapped up, her heart leaping into her throat. For a moment, she had thought she saw a shape, a movement in the swirling snow. She stared hard, her mending forgotten in her lap. But there was nothing, just the endless, blowing white. It was just the wind playing tricks, she told herself. It was just her tired eyes and her hopeful heart making pictures out of nothing. She sighed, a soft sound lost in the noise of the storm. The loneliness felt heavier tonight, a thick blanket smothering the little cabin. She was so tired of being alone. She was so tired of waiting. She was about to get up and make some tea when she saw it again. This time, it was no trick. There was definitely something out there, a darker shadow in the shifting white. It was stumbling, moving slowly, but it was moving toward the cabin. Miriam's breath caught. Her hands turned icy cold. It could not be. After all this time, could it possibly be? She jumped up from her chair, her sewing tumbling to the floor. She pressed her face close to the cold glass, her hands cupped around her eyes to block the reflection of the room. The figure was closer now, a man, struggling through the deep snow. He was bent double against the wind, wrapped in a dark coat that was crusted white with ice. Hope, wild and painful, exploded in her chest. Thomas! Her heart screamed. But as the man lifted his head for a second, fighting to see the path, she knew it was not her brother. The shape of him was all wrong. This man was broader, taller. Her hope vanished, leaving a cold emptiness behind. Who else would be out on a night like this? Who else would be so deep in the wilderness, so far from any trail? The stranger took 2 more stumbling steps. His foot caught on a hidden root buried under the snow, and he fell forward. He did not get up. He lay still, a dark heap on her porch, just beyond the circle of light from her lantern. Miriam's mind raced. Fear told her to bolt the door, to blow out the lamp, to pretend she had seen nothing. A stranger at night was danger. Everyone knew that. But her heart, the same heart that kept a light burning for a lost brother, saw a different truth. A man would die on her porch if she did nothing. He would freeze to death just steps away from her warmth and safety. She did not hesitate long. Her faith was not just about waiting. It was about doing. She rushed to the door and threw it open. The wind screamed into the cabin, scattering ashes from a fireplace and blowing her hair across her face. The cold was so shocking it stole her breath away. She grabbed the man under his arms. He was heavy, a dead weight. "Please," she grunted, pulling with all her strength. "You have to help me." She managed to drag him over the threshold and into the cabin. She used her foot to kick the door shut, finally silencing the screaming wind. She was breathing hard. The man lay on her rug, unmoving. Snow melted from his clothes and hair, forming a puddle around him. His face was pale, his lips tinged with blue. And then she saw the dark, worrying stain on his coat sleeve. It was not just the cold that had felled him. He was hurt. The lantern still burned in the window. Its light, now shining on the very stranger, had called out of the storm. Miriam knelt beside him, her fear pushed aside by a stronger need to help. Her long night of waiting had ended, but a new and dangerous night had just begun. For a long moment, Miriam could only kneel on the rug, staring at the unconscious man she had pulled into her home. The wind outside sounded angrier now, as if it were furious that she had stolen its prize. The man's breathing was a shallow, ragged sound that scared her. She knew she could not leave him lying in a puddle of melting snow. He would freeze all over again. Pushing her fear down into a tight knot in her stomach, she got to work. Her movements became quick and efficient, the same way they were when she chopped wood or tended her vegetable garden. This was a problem to be solved. First, she had to get his frozen coat off. It was stiff with ice and heavy as a stone. She rolled him onto his side, her muscles straining. She tugged and pulled until the sodden garment finally came free. Beneath it, his shirt sleeve was stained a dark, rusty red. Blood. A lot of it. This was worse than just being lost in the cold. Her brother Thomas had taught her basic healing, and she kept a box of supplies for cuts and fevers. She ran to her bedroom and pulled the box from under her bed. Her hands were steady, but her heart was pounding. Returning to the man, she used her sewing scissors to carefully cut away the torn and bloody fabric from his arm. The wound underneath made her gasp. It was a deep, ugly gash on his upper arm, not a clean cut. It looked like something had torn into him. It was inflamed, an angry red against his pale skin, and it clearly had not been properly cleaned. This was why he had collapsed. Infection and exhaustion had claimed him. She built up the fire until the room was fiercely hot. She heated a pot of water and gathered clean rags. She would have to clean the wound, no matter how much it might hurt him. It was the only way to fight the sickness. When she poured the warm water over the cut, the man groaned. His eyes fluttered open for just a second. They were hazy, confused brown, clouded with pain and fever. He looked directly at her, but she did not think he really saw her. "The light," he whispered, his voice rough and dry. "Just follow the light." Then his eyes closed again, and he fell back into his deep, troubled sleep. Those few words sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. He had seen her lantern, just like she had always hoped someone would. He had been lost, and her light had guided him. He was not her brother, but he was alive because of her vigil. The thought filled her with a strange sense of purpose. It took a long time to clean the wound, to pack it with a paste of honey and herbs to draw out the poison, and to bandage it tightly with a clean strip of cloth. When she was finally done, she managed to drag a heavy wool blanket from her bed and cover him up to his chin. She sat back on her heels, tired but wide awake. The man, Daniel Reeves according to the faded name in his coat, slept on. The firelight danced over his face. He was not an old man, but his face had lines of worry and weariness. His hair was dark and messy, and his hands, even in rest, looked calloused and strong from hard work. Miriam pulled her chair closer to the fire and sat down, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She knew she would not sleep tonight. She would keep watch over this stranger. The lantern still burned in the window, its job done for one night. It had brought her a mystery, a responsibility, and a man who was depending on her for his life. The quiet vigil for her brother was over. Now a new and more active watch had begun. The stranger's sleep was not peaceful. For the rest of the night and into the next day, Daniel Reeves was trapped in a prison of fever and bad dreams. Miriam dozed fitfully in her chair, waking every time he muttered or stirred. She kept the fire roaring and brought cool cloths to press against his forehead when he grew too hot. His skin burned under her touch. His dreams were loud and troubled. He would twist under the blanket, his hands clenching into fists. "No, didn't mean to," he would mutter, his words slurred and desperate. "The debt can't pay it." Another time, he cried out, "Run. Have to keep running." Miriam listened, her heart aching with a mixture of fear and pity. His words painted a picture of a man in trouble, a man who was running from something. Was it the law? Had he done something truly bad? The thought made her nervous. She was alone in the wilderness with a man who talked of debts and running. But then, in a quieter moment, he would calm down. His breathing would ease, and he would whisper a single word: "Light." That one word always softened her fear. He had been drawn to her light. In his worst moments, he remembered it. It seemed to comfort him. On the second day, the fever broke. The fierce heat left his body, and he fell into a deep, still, and natural sleep. The storm outside had finally blown itself out, leaving a world of brilliant white silence. Sunlight streamed through the window, making dust motes dance in the air. Miriam used the quiet time to tidy up. She washed the rags she had used and hung them by the fire to dry. She prepared a thin broth from her stored vegetables, in case he woke up hungry. She was stirring the pot over the fire when she heard a rustle behind her. She turned around. Daniel Reeves was awake. His eyes were clear now, a warm, intelligent brown. They were wide with confusion and alarm as he took in the small cabin, the fire, and the woman watching him. He tried to push himself up on his elbows, but a sharp gasp of pain shot through his injured arm, and he fell back onto the pillow. "Where?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Where am I?" "You are safe," Miriam said, her voice calm. She did not move closer, giving him space. "You collapsed on my porch in the storm. You have a bad infection in your arm." His eyes darted around the room, from the door to the window, as if calculating his escape. He looked down at the clean bandage on his arm, then back at her. The suspicion in his eyes slowly mixed with confusion. "I remember the snow," he said slowly, each word effort. "I couldn't see anything. Then a light." He looked directly at her, and for the first time, he truly seemed to see her. "Your light." Miriam nodded. "I keep a lantern in the window." A look of profound relief washed over his face, followed quickly by something that looked like shame. He looked away from her, focusing on the wool blanket covering him. "I am in your debt," he mumbled, his voice low. "Thank you. I am Daniel." "I am Miriam," she replied. "You should rest. Your body has been through a war." She brought him a cup of water and helped him drink. He was too weak to protest. When he finished, he lay back down, exhausted by the small effort. His eyes were already closing, but before he fell asleep again, he looked at the window, where the lantern usually sat during the day. "The light," he whispered again, almost to himself. It was the only thing left. Then he was asleep, but this time it was a quiet, healing sleep, free from the shadows of his past. Miriam watched him. The fearful, running man from his dreams was gone, replaced by someone who was simply grateful and very tired. She did not know his story, not yet, but she knew she had done the right thing. Her light had not brought her brother home, but it had brought a human being back from the edge of death. And for now, that felt like a purpose. Daniel Reeves woke slowly, pulled from the deep well of sleep by the smell of something good. It was a savory, warm smell that made his empty stomach ache. Sunlight, bright and clear, poured through the cabin window, painting a golden square on the floorboards. For a long moment, he just lay there, feeling the solidness of the floor beneath him, the weight of the warm blankets, the dull, throbbing pain in his arm. This was not a dream. This was real. He turned his head. The woman, Miriam, was at the fireplace, stirring a pot that hung over the flames. Her back was to him, and she hummed a soft, tuneless melody. The whole scene was so peaceful, so normal. It felt strange and almost wrong to him. He tried to sit up, his muscles protesting. The movement sent a fresh wave of pain from his arm, and he couldn't stop a low groan from escaping his lips. Miriam turned around quickly. "You are awake," she said. Her voice was calm, but he saw the careful watchfulness in her gray eyes. She did not come closer. "How are you feeling?" "Stiff," he admitted, his voice still rough from disuse. "And sore." He glanced down at his bandaged arm. "You did this." "I did," she said. "The wound was infected. It needed cleaning." "Thank you," he said, the words feeling inadequate. He looked around the small cabin, really seeing it for the first time. It was simple but strong, well cared for. It was a home. His eyes landed on the window again, and he remembered the blinding white and the desperate fight to move his legs. Then the golden light, a fixed point in the swirling chaos. A goal. "Why?" he asked suddenly, looking back at her. "Why did you help me? You do not know me. I could have been anyone." Miriam met his gaze steadily. "It is what we are supposed to do," she said simply. "Help those in need. No one deserves to freeze on a porch." Her answer was so straightforward, so sure, that it left no room for argument. Daniel looked down at his hands. He felt large and clumsy and out of place in her tidy, quiet home. He felt the weight of his own secrets, a heavy coat he could not take off. "My name is Daniel Reeves," he said formally, as if introducing himself at a church social and not from a bed on the floor. "I was traveling. I had a disagreement with some men near the pass. It got out of hand. One of them had a knife." He gestured weakly to his arm. "I lost my pack in the fight. Then the storm came." It was mostly the truth, but it felt like a lie because of all the things he left out. The money, the shame, the running. He watched her face, waiting for the doubt, the fear, the questions. But Miriam just nodded slowly, as if his story was a common one. "The mountains do not care about our disagreements," she said. "The cold takes everyone equally." She turned back to the fire and ladled some broth into a wooden bowl. "You need to eat, to get your strength back." She brought the bowl to him and placed it on the floor beside his pallet along with a spoon. She did not try to feed him, for which he was grateful. It was a small gesture that gave him back a little dignity. He ate slowly. The broth was simple but delicious, warming him from the inside out. The silence in the cabin was not entirely comfortable. It was filled with things unsaid. He was a stranger, an interruption in her life. He knew it. She knew it. When he finished, she took the bowl away. "You should rest more," she said. "The best medicine now is sleep." Daniel lay back down. He was exhausted from the small effort of talking and eating. But as he closed his eyes, his last thought was not of the man he had run from, but of the woman who had not turned him away. Her quiet strength was a new and puzzling thing. He had followed a light to survive, but now he was wondering what kind of person could keep such a light burning. Over the next few days, a new routine settled over the cabin. Daniel slept, ate, and slowly, his strength returned. The wary tension between them began to ease, worn down by necessity and proximity. He was able to sit up for longer periods, propped against the wall with a rolled-up blanket. The silence that had been so heavy became a space for small, careful conversations. "It is a good, strong cabin," Daniel said one morning, watching Miriam knead bread dough on the table. "Did you build it?" Miriam shook her head, a faint smile touching her lips. "No, my brother Thomas, he built it. He is a fine carpenter. He said a good cabin was like a good friend. It should stand strong beside you in any weather. She spoke of him in the present tense, Daniel noticed. It was a small thing, but it stood out. He sounds like a practical man, Daniel said gently. He is, Miriam said. She punched the dough softly. He could fix anything. He made this table. And that chair you were using. He always said what was honest. It showed you its weaknesses, its knots and cracks, so you could know how to make it strong. Daniel was quiet for a moment, thinking about her words. He had never thought of things that way. I used to work with wood, he found himself saying. In a mill back east, cutting big logs into planks. It was loud, not quiet like this. Miriam looked up, interested. It is a good skill to have. It is just a job, he said with a shrug, then winced as the movement pulled at his arm. Later that day, he noticed the cabin door was sticking on the rough floor planks. Every time Miriam opened it, it made a scraping sound and took a good shove. It was a small annoyance, but he saw her slight frown each time. She had to fight with it. The next morning, while Miriam was outside fetching more water from the barrel, Daniel slowly got to his feet. The room swayed for a moment, but he held onto the wall until it steadied. He shuffled to the door and examined the bottom edge. A hinge was slightly loose, and a rough spot on the wood was catching on the floor. When Miriam came back inside, she stopped in surprise to see him on his feet, using the small knife from her sewing kit to carefully whittle away the rough spot on the door. "You should not be up," she said, her voice full of concern. "Almost done," he grunted, focusing on his task. He tightened the hinge with a firm push of his good hand. Finally, he closed the door. It swung shut smoothly and quietly, without a sound. He looked at her, a small, genuine smile on his face for the first time. It changed his whole face, making him look younger. There, an honest piece of wood. It just needed a little help. Miriam stared at the door, then at him. Her expression was unreadable. For a terrible second, he thought he had overstepped, that she would be angry he had touched her things. But then she reached out and pushed the door open and closed again, testing it. The smooth, silent swing was a small miracle in the daily life of the cabin. She looked back at him, and her gray eyes were soft. "Thank you, Daniel," she said, and her voice was warm with real gratitude. "That is a true kindness." It was not a big thing. It was just a door. But in that moment it felt enormous. He had not taken anything. He had not caused a problem. He had fixed something. He had been useful. The feeling was so foreign and so good that it made his throat feel tight. He had told her a little about his past work, and she had shared a memory of her brother. They had not spoken of deep secrets or great sorrows, but they had shared something small and true. And in the quiet of the wilderness, that small thing felt like the beginning of a fragile, precious trust. Just as Daniel was finding his footing, the world outside turned white and wild again. The wind, which had been whispering around the cabin eaves, began to howl with a renewed fury. The bright sunlight vanished, swallowed by thick, gray clouds that rolled in from the mountains with terrifying speed. Within an hour, snow was falling so heavily that the trees just beyond the porch became faint, gray ghosts. Miriam bolted the door and pulled the heavy hide curtain across the window, sealing them in. The cabin, which had begun to feel spacious with their careful conversations, suddenly shrank. It was just the two of them, the fire and the roaring of the storm. There was nothing to do but wait it out. The isolation was absolute. At first, they tried to maintain their careful distance. Miriam mended clothes. Daniel sharpened spoon handle into a useful tool with his small knife. But the noise of the wind was a constant, pressing presence, making normal silence impossible. It was Daniel who broke first. The constant howl seemed to scrape at the walls he kept around his own memories. "I was not entirely truthful before," he said, his voice low, almost lost under the wind scream. He stared into the fire, not at her. "The disagreement I had, it was about money. I managed a logging crew. I was trusted with the men's pay. There was a man, a friend, or I thought he was. He offered me a chance to double the money in a business deal. It seemed so sure." He took a shaky breath. Miriam put her mending down in her lap and listened, her hand still. It was not sure. It was a trick. The money, all of it was gone. I failed them. Every single man who had worked for me. I was so ashamed. I thought I could run, find work somewhere else, earn it back to send to them before they even knew it was missing. But word travels faster than a man. His shoulders slumped. The men I fought, they were not thieves. They were loggers. They just wanted what was theirs, and I had nothing to give them. He finally looked up at her, his eyes full of a pain that had nothing to do with his injured arm. I am not a dangerous man, Miriam, but I am a foolish one, and a coward. I ran instead of facing what I had done. The confession hung in the air between them, mixing with the smoke from the fire. Miriam was quiet for a long time, absorbing his story. She did not look afraid. She looked thoughtful. "You made a mistake," she said finally, her voice calm. "A very big one. But you are trying to put it right by running toward work, not away from responsibility. That is not the act of a coward." Daniel stared at her, stunned. He had expected anger, or at least disappointment, not this quiet grace. "Why do you keep the lantern?" he asked suddenly, needing to turn the attention away from his own failure. "Every night. I have seen you. You were waiting for someone." Miriam's eyes moved to the window, as if she could see through the hide curtain and the blinding snow to the lantern that was not there. "My brother," she said softly. "Thomas. He went out in a storm like this one a year ago. He never came back." She told him then about Thomas, his laughter, his skill with wood, his protective love for his younger sister. She spoke of the empty silence that followed his disappearance, and of the neighbors who gently urged her to accept he was gone. "They think I am living in the past," she whispered, "that my hope is a foolish thing. Some days I fear they are right. Some days the doubt is so heavy. But to blow out the lantern, it feels like I am blowing out the last piece of him. It feels like I am giving up on him, and on the belief that God has a plan, even in the darkness." Daniel listened, and for the first time, he understood. Her vigil was not just hope. It was faith. It was the hardest kind of faith, the kind that holds on when there is no proof left to hold on to. His own shame felt small next to her immense, quiet strength. The storm raged outside, but inside, the last walls between them had fallen down. They were no longer a helper and a patient, or even just two people sharing a cabin. They were two lost souls, each carrying a heavy weight, and they had finally shown each other what they carried. The storm blew itself out after 2 days, leaving a world buried in deep, soft, silent snow. The sun returned, sparkling off a billion icy crystals. The world was clean and new. Daniel was strong enough now to move around the cabin easily. His arm was healing well. That evening, as the deep blue of twilight began to seep into the sky, he watched Miriam take the lantern from the table. "May I?" he asked quietly. Miriam paused, surprised. Then she nodded and handed it to him. He lifted it, feeling its familiar weight. He struck the match, just as he had seen her do a dozen times, and lit the wick. The flame bloomed, steady and bright. He unlatched the window, feeling the bite of the cold evening air, and placed the lantern carefully on the sill. He closed the window, and the little light took up its nightly post. He turned to find Miriam watching him, her expression unreadable. "Why do you do it?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Really? After all this time, with everyone telling you to stop, how do you keep believing he might still be out there?" Miriam came to stand beside him at the window, looking out at the flame against the darkening world. "It is not just about him being out there," she said, "although I will always hope for that. It is about more than that." She tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear, searching for the right words. "The light is the prayer. It is me telling God that I am still trusting him, even when I do not understand. It is me saying that I believe light is stronger than darkness, that hope is stronger than despair." She looked at Daniel. "When Thomas disappeared, the world went very dark for me. Lighting this every night was my way of pushing back against that darkness. First it was for him, but then it became for me too, to remind myself that I am still here, and that I must not let the darkness win." Daniel looked from her face to the lantern. He had thought it was a signal. He now saw it was a sermon. A silent, powerful lesson in faith. "I have never known faith like that," he admitted, his voice full of wonder. "I have only known failure. I thought God must be ashamed of me, that I had to hide my mistakes from him and everyone else." "Oh, Daniel," Miriam said, her voice soft as the snow outside. "God's love is not like that. It is not a thing you earn by being perfect. It is a gift. It is like this lantern. It is always burning, always waiting for you. You do not have to find your way through the dark alone. You just have to turn toward the light." Her words settled deep inside him, warming a place that had been cold for a very long time. He had been running from his mistakes, thinking they defined him. She was telling him he was defined by something else entirely, by grace. He looked at the lantern again, and its light seemed different to him. It was no longer just a symbol of her hope for her brother. It was a promise that no matter how lost you were, a light could guide you home, and that no matter what you had done, you could still be welcomed back into the light. He did not say anything else. He just stood beside her in the quiet, watching the flame. He had followed a light to save his life. Now, he was starting to believe it could save his soul too. The deep snow made the path to town difficult, but not impossible. A few days after the storm, the first visitor arrived. The sound of snowshoes crunching outside and a friendly call of "Hello, the cabin," made Miriam look up from her washing. It was Mr. Anders, the shopkeeper from the settlement. A kind, older man with a beard as white as the snow. He often checked on Miriam when the weather was bad. He stomped his boots on the porch and opened the door, a cheerful smile on his face that froze the moment he stepped inside. His eyes landed immediately on Daniel, who was sitting at the table, carefully oiling the hinges of a cupboard with a small rag. The smile vanished, replaced by shock and then deep concern. Daniel stood up slowly, his own expression turning guarded. "Miriam," Mr. Anders said, his eyes flicking between her and the strange man in her home. I came to see if you had weathered the storm all right." "We are fine, Mr. Anders, thank you," Miriam said, wiping her hands on her apron. Her voice was calm, but she held herself a little straighter. "This is Daniel Reeves. He was caught in the blizzard last week and was injured. I have been helping him get back on his feet. Daniel, this is Mr. Anders. He runs the general store." Daniel gave a short, polite nod. "Sir." Mr. Anders returned the nod, his manner stiff. "Mr. Reeves." He turned his attention fully back to Miriam, his fatherly concern now mixed with clear disapproval. "Miriam, my dear, this is highly unusual. You are a woman alone out here. You know what people will say." The warmth seemed to leak out of the cabin. Miriam's cheeks felt hot. "What people say is less important than doing what is right," she replied, her voice even. A man was hurt and freezing. I could not turn him away. "But who is he?" Mr. Anders asked, his voice dropping to a whisper, though Daniel could still hear every word. "Where did he come from?" "You know nothing about him." "I know that he is a decent man who needed help," Miriam said, her chin lifting a fraction. "And that is enough for me." Mr. Anders sighed heavy, disappointed sound. He looked at Daniel with clear mistrust. "I hope your kindness is not misplaced," he said finally. "I will be on my way. The community will be relieved to know you are safe." The way he said community made it sound like a warning. After he left, the cabin felt colder. The comfortable peace they had built was shattered. Daniel stood by the cupboard, the oil rag forgotten in his hand. He looked stricken. "I have brought trouble to your door," he said quietly. "I told you I would." Miriam busied herself with her washing, trying to hide the upset on her own face. "Mr. Anders is a good man. He is just worried. It does not matter." But it did matter. The next day, Mrs. Gable, the preacher's wife, arrived on her own snowshoes. Her visit was less about kindness and more about curiosity. She asked pointed questions about Daniel's origins and his plans, her eyes missing nothing in the small cabin. She left with a tight, disapproving smile. The isolation was broken, and in its place was the weight of other people's opinions. Miriam could feel the judgment hanging in the air every time she went to the settlement for supplies. The friendly chatter would stop when she approached. People would look at her with pity or suspicion. Daniel saw it all. He saw the way her shoulders tightened when she returned from town. He heard the quiet sighs she thought he did not notice. He was a problem, a stain on her good name. He was the very thing he had feared he would be, a burden. And the old, familiar instinct to run, to solve the problem by disappearing, began to whisper to him again. The whispers grew too loud. A few days after Mrs. Gable's visit, Daniel found his mended coat and pack that Miriam had cleaned for him. His few belongings were inside. He stood in the quiet cabin, his heart a heavy stone in his chest. This was the only way. He had to leave before he ruined her life completely. Miriam was outside, chopping kindling. When she came back in, her cheeks pink from the cold, she stopped short at the sight of him, wearing his coat, his pack in his good hand. "What are you doing?" she asked, her breath forming little clouds in the air. "I am leaving, Miriam," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I cannot stay. Every day I am here, I cause you more pain. I see it when you come back from town. I hear it in the silence. Your neighbors are right. This is not proper. I am hurting your reputation, the life you have built here." He took a step toward the door. "You saved my life. That is a debt I can never repay. But the best way I can thank you now is to go, so you can have your peace back." Miriam dropped the kindling into the basket by the fire with a clatter. Her gray eyes, usually so calm, flashed with a fire he had never seen before. "You think this is peace?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Living alone, waiting alone. You think the whispers of a few people are worse than that." She took a step toward him, her hands clenched at her sides. "When you came here, you were a stranger. But you are not a stranger anymore. You are my friend. You have been kind and helpful, and you have listened. You have given me something to care for besides my own grief." Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not look away. "You told me you were a coward for running. So what is this? This is running, Daniel. Again, you are running from a problem instead of staying to face it. True belonging is not about finding a place where everything is easy. It is about finding a place that is worth staying for, even when it is hard." Her words hit him like a physical blow. He stood frozen, his hand on the door latch. "This is worth staying for," she said, her voice softening. She gestured around the small, warm cabin. "This is worth fighting for. But you have to choose it. You have to choose to stay." Daniel looked at her. He saw the strength in her face, the unwavering faith that had kept a light burning for a year. She was not asking him to stay for pity. She was asking him to stay because she saw something in him worth keeping. She believed he was stronger than his mistakes. The old instinct to run, to hide, was powerful, but a new feeling was stronger. It was the desire to be the man she believed him to be. He let his hand fall from the latch. His pack slipped from his fingers and thudded softly on the floor. "You are right," he whispered, his voice thick. "Running is easy. Staying is hard." He took a deep breath, making the choice, the most important one of his life. "I choose to stay, if you will have me." Miriam nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It was followed by a small, relieved smile. Good. He was not leaving. The danger had passed, but a new challenge had just begun. They were no longer just two people in a cabin. They were a pair, standing together against the world outside. And for the first time, Daniel felt not like a guest, but like he was home. Winter's tight, frozen grip could not last forever. Slowly, quietly, the world began to change. The deep snow softened, settling into itself. The icicles lining the roof eaves dripped a steady, musical rhythm, and the air lost its bitter edge, carrying instead the clean, wet smell of earth waiting under the white blanket. The promise of spring whispered on the wind. Inside the cabin, the change was just as profound. The wary silence had been replaced by a comfortable, easy companionship. Daniel's arm had healed strong. He had taken over the heavier chores, splitting wood, repairing the stone step on the porch, and with Miriam's blessing, building anew, stronger shudder for the window. He had also gone into the settlement with her. It had not been easy. He saw the curious looks, heard the hushed conversations, but he held his head high. He worked hard, helping Mr. Anders unload a heavy wagon of supplies, without being asked. He spoke respectfully to the preacher and his wife. He did not try to hide or explain his past. He simply showed them who he was now, a man trying to be better. Slowly, the suspicion in people's eyes began to fade, replaced by a cautious acceptance. They saw the way he looked at Miriam, with a protective gentleness. They saw the way she smiled more freely now, a lightness in her step that had been missing for a long time. One evening, as the last of the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Daniel and Miriam stood on the porch. The air was chilly, but it was the chill of early spring, full of hope, not the deadly cold of deep winter. Daniel looked at the lantern, now sitting on the porch rail, ready to be lit. "It feels different this year," he said softly. Miriam nodded, understanding him completely. "It does." The pain of her missing brother was still there, a quiet, loved ache in her heart, but it was no longer a raw, open wound. The lantern was no longer a desperate plea. It had become a peaceful remembrance, a symbol of love that would never fade. Daniel turned to face her, his expression serious and full of a feeling so big it almost scared him. "Miriam," he began, his voice a little unsteady, "when I followed your light, I was a broken man, lost in every way. You didn't just nurse my arm back to health. You showed me what real faith looks like. You taught me about grace. You made me believe I could belong somewhere." He took her hands in his. They were warm and strong. "You have healed my heart, and if you will let me, I would like to spend the rest of my life keeping the darkness away from your door. I love you." Tears filled Miriam's eyes, but they were tears of joy. She had spent so long looking out into the darkness, waiting. Now she realized the answer to her prayers had not come from the distant woods, but had been delivered right to her porch. He was her new beginning. "I love you too, Daniel," she said, her voice clear and sure. "You are my miracle." He smiled, a full, happy smile that reached his warm brown eyes. He leaned in and kissed her gently, a promise sealed under the vast, starry sky. Together, they lit the lantern. Daniel lifted it and placed it in its rightful place in the window. It burned steadily, its golden glow a beacon against the twilight. It was a light for memories cherished. It was a light for faith sustained. It was a light for a future built together. They stood side by side, watching it shine. Two once lost souls who had found their way home to each other, guided by a single, unwavering flame. Thank you for joining me on this journey of faith, hope, and healing on the Canadian frontier. If this story lit a spark in your heart, please consider leaving a like to let me know you enjoyed it. Subscribe for more stories where love and light guide the way through the darkest of seasons.